History is being made! History is being made! In this 200th anniversary year of the birth of the modern railway, now I'm in the presence of greatness. I'm exploring how the arrival of the railways shaped Britain. What a beautiful little Bradshaw. Travelling along the world's first intercity route, I'll look at how railways transformed the economy, society, and the landscape. That track is floating on a raft. Amazing. And how railways have captured the nation's imagination. In Derby, the air hums with excitement. Thousands are waiting for the gates to open on a spectacular highlight of the railway's bicentenary celebrations. This is the largest ever gathering of locomotives drawn from the last 200 years. For days and weeks now, they've been chugging from across the country to the famous railway works at Litchurch Lane in Derby. And now, tens of thousands of spectators, photographers and enthusiasts will mob exhibits like Locomotion No.1, Flying Scotsman, the Sir Nigel Gresley and other icons from the ages of steam and diesel and electric, spanning 2 centuries of British railway history, and the gates have opened. There's great excitement. This is not a sight you see every day, to put it mildly. And the memories, the souvenirs, the photographs from today will last a lifetime. It's an extraordinary roll call of the railway's biggest stars. What brings you to the greatest gathering?
I've grown up as a rail enthusiast all my life and also fortunate to work in the industry now. The amount of rolling stock here, variety as well.
I think it's just amazing, just like seeing them all together, and it's just such a huge venue as well.
There's just something about the railway and the history behind it and the future in front of it and the people on it. There's so many cogs on this massive machine and it's just beautiful. It works.
Do you have favourites?
Yes, I quite like the HST, and also I quite like Blue Peter. That's quite a nice one.
I'm a big fan of sort of the older diesels, really. There's something here for everyone, though.
I don't know what I expected from the event, but it's crazy.
BBC Radio Derby, we're out and about speaking to Michael Portillo. And where do you buy those trousers?
Ah, that's my little secret. In the company of giants, one small locomotive stands silent, the primitive engine that started it all. The 200-year history began in 1825 with the Stockton and Darlington Railway, Locomotion No.1. There's been a lot of evolution since, but I think that every engine since bears its DNA. I'll return to the greatest gathering later, but now I'm going back to the beginnings. 5 years after the opening of the Stockton and Darlington Railway came the world's first intercity line, the Liverpool and Manchester. A line forever linked with one of the most famous locomotives in history, Stephenson's Rocket. Railways transformed British lives, spurring economic activity and national prosperity. People could travel long distances, explore, take holidays, and enjoy new foods. The railways required the standardization of time across the country. The steam locomotive was the engine of radical change. Whereas coal was the driving force behind the Stockton and Darlington Railway, the booming cotton trade spurred Britain's first intercity line. Raw cotton from the United States arrived in the port of Liverpool, and in the 1820s the pressing need was for fast, reliable transport in bulk to the hungry mills of Manchester. I've come to the city's Bridgewater Canal, where railway viaducts from different eras crisscross each other, to meet Manchester-born historian Michaela Hughes. Michaela, in the 1820s, what's the problem with getting goods from Liverpool to Manchester?
So the first one is it's really expensive. The second one is that it was so unreliable. So obviously the canal is very much dependent upon the weather. And another problem was the fact of how long it actually took. So it roughly took 21 days to get your goods from America to the port of Liverpool. But then they could sit in Runcorn docks for like 6 weeks.
Were the roads any good?
No. You've got your turnpike trusts who are, in charge of keeping the roads, but they're a state. They're not reliable enough.
Who came up with the idea of a railway?
So it's Liverpool businessmen that are thinking, we want to get our cotton into Manchester and then get it out to the rest of Britain.
The railway needed an Act of Parliament. Was that straightforward?
No. So in 1825, they tried to get it through, but it didn't happen. The reason it didn't happen, it was brilliant. So when you actually read the list of some of the objections, one of them was, hens will stop laying eggs. The landowners, who were heavily invested in the canals, were like, no, our horses are going to get extinct. Investors in canal companies are saying no. And all these men are the ones that are voting against it in Parliament.
And so eventually it does get through Parliament.
Yeah.
The railway opens in September 1830 with a great fanfare. In the months and years that followed, have the expectations of the railway been exaggerated or what?
Changes the game. If you think about the time it took to get a canal from Liverpool to Manchester, you're looking at roughly 12 hours. The railway cut that time down to 2. It kept my ancestor, George Hughes, my 3 times great-grandfather, it kept that family out of the workhouse. He came from Liverpool in the late 1840s and got a job here in Manchester at the Newton Heath on the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway as a locomotive engine driver.
Well, that is interesting. And they're keeping me out of the workhouse today.
Absolutely.
Freight and passengers bound for Manchester arrived at a purpose-built terminus in the Castlefield district of the city. The 1830 station is the most complete surviving early railway station complex in the world. It now forms part of the Science and Industry Museum, where Sarah Baines is Curator of Engineering. Sarah, this is rather exciting. We are walking really on historic railway ground here, aren't we?
We are. It's a really special site. So this is Liverpool Road Station, which is the Manchester terminus of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, which opened here in 1830.
And what we see here now, how close is this to what stood in 1830?
It's very much as it would have been. This is what passengers would have experienced when they were here.
The building on the left here?
So this is the 1830 warehouse. This is the oldest railway warehouse in the world.
So it strikes me that the people who built this line were visionaries. They foresaw the need for a passenger side and a freight side and for twin tracks.
Yep, so it's really got all of the elements of a modern railway. The twin tracks are really important. It was the first time that had been done, and it allowed for trains to go in both directions at the same time. You've also got a fully timetabled service. It was also a fully signalled route, which made it a lot safer. So there was a lot of firsts here, but it really worked, and it just created that model that all of the railways were then built on.
Looking at the warehouse, the railway was largely motivated by the needs of the cotton industry. How successful is it in meeting those needs?
It was a runaway success. In one record shipment, there was 100 wagons carrying 500 tonnes of cotton.
A barge would manage about 50 tonnes, so a train is doing 10 times the work of a barge. And then, thinking about the passenger side, did the railway surpass expectations?
Yeah, absolutely did. Originally, they imagined that about 250 people a day would use the passenger station, and within a few months, there were nearly 1,000 people a day using it.
Part of the reason was that the train was twice the speed of the stagecoach, but half the price. The Liverpool and Manchester line proved what railways could be: faster, cheaper, and more reliable than anything before. Its success inspired a wave of railway building across Britain. Down a lovely broad staircase. Tell me about the geography here of the original station.
Yep, so we're now in the first class booking hall. So this is where passengers would have come in from street level here into the booking hall and bought the tickets. And then when they were ready to board the train, they would go back up the stairs that we've just come down.
And here we have a wonderful historic map. What a thing of beauty this is.
So this is a plan and section of the proposed route for the Liverpool to Manchester Railway, and it's from 1824.
I can see here the line, pretty straight until it arrives towards Liverpool. This shows me the elevations, and very remarkably, it's a very flat railway, isn't it?
That's right, but there were some real engineering feats that needed to be achieved. So sometimes there was very boggy land, like at Chat Moss.
Show me Chat Moss, if you would.
So this is Chat Moss just here, so you can see how big it is, what a challenge it was to cross.
I've got you. This is a rather smaller delicacy here. What's this?
So I thought you'd be really excited to see this. This is the first ever Bradshaw's railway timetable.
Wow.
You can see it's really easy to hold, and that just goes to show how you immediately imagined people taking this on a railway journey.
Yes, putting it in their pocket.
That's right. If we look at this page, we can see a map from 1839, which is when this was published. And you can see that by 1839, there were already loads of railways snaking across the landscape of Lancashire.
There are indeed. Any idea how many route miles we had by then in the country?
There were 1,500 miles of railway routes across the country by then.
Liverpool and Manchester has only opened in 1830, an extraordinary rate of progress and building.
It's incredible.
What a beautiful little Bradshaw. And your third object, something very different. Evidently it is a sundial.
Yep, so this is a really special sundial. It really exemplifies that transition from people using local mean time to using standardised time.
This was installed apparently at the railway station in Manchester in 1833.
That's right, so before the railways, people were using local mean time and they were setting clocks by the position of the sun at noon. And that meant that in different towns you had different time zones, which, as you can imagine, was a real problem when it came to writing railway timetables.
The railways then standardised time. Is this implemented by law or is it just a railway convention?
It was quite a slow process. So through the 1830s, a lot of local railways did start using Greenwich Mean Time in order to have a set time. That really picked up in the 1840s, but amazingly, it was actually 1880 before Greenwich Mean Time became standard time for the whole of the UK.
Yeah, the railways were unbelievably influential in almost everything. Thanks to the new railway, Manchester's cotton trade boomed, and the Liverpool Road station was turned over exclusively to freight. To get an idea of what Manchester's mills would have looked like then, I'm taking a trip to the Cheshire countryside. In 1781, Richard Arkwright had opened the world's first steam-powered textile mill in Manchester. And the number of mills in the city grew to over 100 by the middle of the 19th century. I have arrived in style. Style, south of Manchester, has one of the best preserved textile factories from the Industrial Revolution. Set in 400 acres of beautiful woodland and gardens on the banks of the River Bollin, Quarry Bank Mill still spins cotton on 19th century machines. Ali Silica is the National Trust Collections and House Manager. Ali, William Blake might have thought it dark and satanic, but I actually find the Quarry Bank Mill absolutely magnificent. From when does it date?
So Quarry Bank was built in 1784 by Samuel Gregg, and yes, as you say, it's in a very idyllic location, and that's how mills were built in the early Industrial Revolution. Mill owners wanted to build their mills where the source of power was, and at the time that was water.
Yeah, this one is very early, and I'm just imagining then that These skills of spinning, for example, these were present in the population. They were doing this sort of stuff in their cottages.
Yes, absolutely. Lancashire and Cheshire had a long tradition of spinning and weaving textiles at home.
And these people were lured out of their cottages by, I suppose, substantial wages by comparison with what they had been earning.
Yes, and there was a more stable income as well.
You still have the machines spinning inside, is that true?
Yes, it's true.
May I take a look?
Yes, let's.
Skilled operators work the antique machines, keeping the traditional spinning craft alive and producing items for sale. Ali, it's an impressive space with these machines running, but two things strike me straight away. It is very noisy, and I suspect in there, pretty dangerous. You can get your hand caught anywhere.
Yes, it's very loud, and that's only 2 machines running. If you can imagine, there were rooms and rooms of these machines with hundreds in them.
How many people worked in here?
So at the height of its operation, there were about 500 workers working at Quarry Bank.
This mill precedes the railways by several decades, so they were already able to do this kind of business. But my goodness, the railways, with their capacity to move goods at speed and with great reliability, that must have been a big change, an important improvement.
Yes, it was definitely a huge improvement. Until then, the mills had been relying on canals and the road, which were not very safe, and they couldn't carry as much as trains could carry. So yes, trains did transform the cotton industry.
Can you give me any idea of the scale of cotton in Lancashire and Cheshire? I mean, it just was transformative, wasn't it?
It was huge. It became a global trade, and it put Lancashire on the map. Thousands of bales of cotton were coming into the port of Liverpool and being brought into Manchester and into the country, and then tons of finished goods were then exported back across the world. It was huge.
And what you're doing here today, these planking machines, this is what was done here traditionally. What's your product coming off here?
So on the looms, we weave calico, and you can use it for anything. Clothes, household goods, anything.
How exceptional is it that the machines are still running in a place where this activity has been continued for more than 2 centuries?
Oh, it's so important to keep these machines going. It's such a core part of people's history here. They need to keep going, and we need to maintain those skills.
In the 1840s, as the railway network expanded across Britain, it transformed the lives of people, not least the spinners and weavers of Quarry Bank Mill. In the Georgian house of the mill owner Samuel Gregg, Ali wants to show me some fascinating archive that she's uncovered. It's such a contrast, isn't it, with the mill from which we've just come. That would be Gregg's bust, would it?
Yes, that's Samuel Gregg.
Uh-huh. And so here we sit at his card table. Were there any signs that the Greggs cared about their workforce, do you think?
Yes, overall they did care about their workers in that they wanted them to be healthy and they wanted them to stay here, but they also wanted them to have days out as well.
And how would they spend those days out?
Normally they would either stay in Style or go into nearby Wilmslow, but the advent of the train line to Wilmslow changed things for them. And these letters are an example of that. Mrs. Gregg organised a day out for some of the female weavers to go out into Manchester.
Madam, it is with great pleasure that I write these few lines of what I can remember of what I saw in the Art Treasure exhibition. The day we went was on the Wakes Wednesday, September the 2nd, and we arrived there by railway at a little before 11 a.m. And she then describes a lot of the sort of paintings and works of art that she saw, and she concludes, with these few lines, I conclude, feeling myself unable to express my thankfulness for the favours I have had from your hands. So there's maybe a sense here that they feel an obligation to write these letters, and they seem to have taken their time about it. But nonetheless, they're expressing their gratitude for having been sent to this educational exhibition.
Yes, absolutely. And if you can imagine how different it must have been for them to leave the monotony of every day working in the mill day in, day out, and just going on the train for them. You can see it was such a great day.
Yeah, they mention the train very clearly, but it leads them to a different world, doesn't it? Railways encroached on every aspect of society and culture. People could travel much further, more often, more quickly. The effect on leisure was dramatic. The railways in Britain grew rapidly. By 1851, there was a system of trunk routes in place connecting major cities. And by 1881, that had doubled again. It's time to consider the impact of that glorious revolution on the glorious game. Manchester United, one of the world's most successful football clubs, had its origin among railmen. It was founded by workers of the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway in 1878. At first named Newton Heath, after the railway depot, the team began by playing against other railway clubs. United won its first league title in 1908, and the following year triumphed at the FA Cup final held at Crystal Palace, South London, watched by fans who'd travelled by train. Time for me to try out my skills.
Don't kick yet. Wait for the whistle each time.
At the National Football Museum, curator Dr. Alexander Jackson has his hands on the trophy. Alex, that is a magnificent piece of silverware that you're carrying. What is it?
This is the oldest surviving FA Cup. The first one was used between 1872 and 1895, when unfortunately it was stolen to be melted down for its silver value. And this is the replacement.
It's a very, very fine piece, and the winners are recorded over the ages. Just give it a spin for me, if you would, please. Look at this. 1879, Old Etonians. 1880, a bit of a change, Clapham Rovers. And then eventually we get to more familiar names, Aston Villa, Blackburn Rovers, and just squeezing on there, Wolverhampton Wanderers. So is it then, particularly for the FA Cup, and particularly for the FA Cup final, that people start to travel in large numbers by train?
Partly. When the Football League's created in 1888, it creates a regular pattern of Saturday professional football, and that brings fans from around the regions into their local towns and cities, which really boost up the numbers for the crowds. But the FA Cup final, yes, is an especially important one where fans will save up throughout the year to then travel down to London to see the most important game of the year.
And the railway companies rode in with this. I mean, they didn't just rely on regular services, they were putting on football specials.
Absolutely. For a cup final like this in 1904, when Manchester City went and won it for the first time in their history, it's estimated about 40,000 fans came down from the north, another 20,000 from across the south, to create a very obviously large crowd for that final.
This has the look of a railway timetable. This is what? This is a special going down to a cup final?
It is, yes, for the 1951 FA Cup final between Blackpool and Newcastle United. The Blackpool fans would have been able to look at this to work out what train to get down to London.
What is interesting about this is how tailored the train is. So it makes a lot of stops in the Blackpool area, then apparently nothing, and it gets routed directly to Wembley. Also, I find the price very interesting. I can probably tell you about this. So 46 shillings, of course, is more than £2. I think the average wage was probably about £15 a week then. So here is a working person giving a big proportion of his weekly wage just to go down and see the cup finals.
It is, and this is also the era of still the maximum wage professional footballers. So a footballer then would earn about £20 a week. So it's almost 1/10 of what a professional footballer would have earned to travel down, which shows, again, the connection between working class players and their fans at that time.
Yeah, a very different ratio from today, isn't it? As well as shaping our national game, railways also led to the creation of a much-loved national dish. Thank you very much indeed. Looks great. In the 19th century, steam trawlers were bringing fish in from deep waters in the North Sea. But the breakthrough for fish and chips was refrigeration and the railway network. because that meant that fresh fish could arrive from the sea into all the cities of Britain. And so fish and chips became extremely popular. At their peak, there were 35,000 chippies like this one across the country. And a portion of fish and chips in the 19th century was probably 2 or 3 pence in old money. So it was a treat, but it was an affordable treat. And so fish and chips took off. And in the process, you can imagine, the stocks of the North Sea took a real battering. I'm exploring the impact of railways on Britain by travelling the world's first intercity route, which opened in 1830 between Liverpool and Manchester. On the face of it, it doesn't look too difficult to build a line between Liverpool and Manchester. There's no barrier of mountains. But just to the west of Manchester, there formed a few thousand years ago a peat bog called Chat Moss, 7 to 9 meters deep, soft and wet, very ill-suited to supporting track or heavy locomotives or great cargoes of cotton. And the solution that was proposed by the engineer George Stephenson was audacious: to float the track upon the bog. Stephenson's remedy is still going strong. Buried beneath the track, this engineering marvel goes unnoticed by most who travel over it. At Astley Level Crossing, I'm going to observe his ingenuity in action. Train approaching at high speed. I'm going to crouch down and see what I can see. Yep, for sure. As it came towards me, it was a little bit like a ship. It was just riding a wave as it approached the level crossing, because that track is floating on a raft. Amazing. Today, Chat Moss occupies an area of just over 10.5 square miles, and most of the land is now grassland or farmed. Hello, Dave. I'm Michael.
Nice to meet you.
Dave Woodward from the Lancashire Wildlife Trust understands the challenge that George Stephenson faced in the late 1820s and how he solved the problem. Dave, what is Chat Moss?
What was Chat Moss, perhaps? It was an enormous area of peat bog, approximately 28 square kilometres.
And formed when and how?
It started at the end of the last ice age, like roughly 10,000 years ago.
And pretty deep and pretty wet?
Very wet, and up to 10 metres of peat on here.
And all of those things would be a big challenge to the railway builder?
They would very much so, yes. He first tried to make a foundation for the railway by traditional means, which had been earth, clay and such like. But all the material just kept disappearing into the bog. So we then chose a rather novel way to solve it, where he laid a foundation of branches, straw bales and cotton bales, and actually floated the railway across the bog.
So they put down the branches and the bales, and then, I mean, you've got to have something fairly solid on top of that.
They would then put the stone on top of that, as it is now. Of course, over the years, all the bales and the branches have disappeared below ground level slowly, and no doubt they've had to top it up.
Tell me then what it is that has happened to the peat bog. Why is it not the way it was back in 1830?
Because the opening of the railway line connected it to Liverpool and Manchester.
Yes.
It allowed it to be exploited. There was no access to it at all before, and it had been exploited in various methods. One of them was conversion of farmland, which could sell the produce to Manchester and Liverpool. The other was cutting over a peat on the mossland, which was used as stable litter in both Liverpool and Manchester. And the other thing would be the deposit of night soil from Manchester, who had enormous quantities of this stuff, but they had to get rid of. And they brought it all onto the mossland.
Night soil? Do you mean poo?
Poo, that's correct, yes. In the days before they had public sewers.
Right, and that was dumped on here, was it?
Yes.
This is now farmland, this is grassland.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Are you able to show me what the bog used to look like in its entirety?
We'd have to go on parts of the managed areas of Chat Moss, which Lancashire Wildlife Trust acquired to convert back to raised bog 40 years ago.
Can we go and take a look at that?
You want to take a look at that pan?
Let's do that. Peat bogs store vast amounts of carbon and reduce the risk of flooding by soaking up rainwater. But just 2% of the lowland raised bogs across Lancashire, Greater Manchester and North Merseyside are in a restorable condition. So Dave, this looks fundamentally different from where we were before. This is very boggy indeed. I can see a lot of moisture and a lot of wild plants. And this is your peat in preparation. This is your juvenile peat, is it?
It is indeed. It's not quite there yet, but it's getting there. You can see the plants around here. The sphagnum mosses are doing quite well.
And that's taken you a while to grow that, hasn't it?
It does, but we were starting from such a low base. This was planted about 40 years ago.
And this moss, over time, converts into peat,
It does, yes. Without sphagnum moss, you don't have a bog.
Right. It is very wet. I mean, does this give me an idea of the challenge that was faced by the railway builder?
Yes. This is what he would have had to try and put a railway on. The peat at the time, because it was relatively new, would not have been compressed at all. And you could neither walk across it nor ride a horse across it.
No, no, no. I'm rejoining the Liverpool and Manchester Railway at Newton Le Willows, which was called Newton Bridge when it first opened in 1830. In the entrance to the station, a monument reminds us that even from the beginning, railways combined great innovation with new risks. On the very first day of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, disaster struck. William Huskisson was a Member of Parliament for more than 30 years and he held 3 senior positions in government. He attended the inauguration of the Liverpool to Manchester Railway. And when his train stopped at Parkside, very close to here, he got out from his carriage, walked along the train to reach a carriage where the Duke of Wellington was travelling. But as he clambered back on board, he was struck by a train on the parallel track being pulled by rocket. He was crushed and he died of his injuries. Now, he may not have been exactly the first person to die in a railway accident, but he was certainly one of the first, and he was certainly the first celebrity. And he's gone down in history for dying on the day that British engineering was unveiling a whole new world. All along this line you can find traces of early railway feats of engineering. I'm now going to be passing over the Sankey Viaduct, designed by George Stephenson, the first major railway viaduct in the world, with its beautiful 9 arches. But as the foundations were piled in 1828, the directors of the railway had yet to make up their minds as to what would cross it. It may seem odd to us now that the Liverpool and Manchester Railway was designed and largely built before it had been decided how its trains would be powered. It was even possible that they would be hauled by stationary engines. In an age of science, the railway company decided to test various designs of locomotive in competition with each other. And that, incidentally, would create an immense public spectacle which would advertise the forthcoming service. Roll up for the Rainhill trials. In October 1829, the competitors gathered at Rainhill on Merseyside, and thousands lined the track for a spectacle with all the drama of a Grand National. At Rainhill Station, I'll learn about the competition from Rhiann and David Wood from the Rainhill Railway and Heritage Society. Rhiann, the directors of the railway company, what were the options that they had for powering their trains?
At that point in time, horse-drawn, pulley system with static machines, gravity or locomotives. But if you think of having static machines from Liverpool to Manchester, you would have had to have an awful lot. Horses, they could only, at 10 mile an hour, which is what they wanted them to do, the horses could only be used for about 2 hours per day. So it was not going to be a very quick way of moving things.
What do you think the directors of the railway company favoured?
The directors actually favoured static machinery with the pulley.
Extraordinary to think they might have used static engines. However, the Rainhill trials had several locomotives that were put forward as candidates. And which of those were steam locomotives?
There were only 4, which were Rocket, Sansbury, Perseverance and Novelty.
What was the track? What was the course?
Well, the course was in between the famous Skew Bridge and the other bridge, 1.25 miles towards Manchester. They chose Rainhill because it was nice and level and all locomotives had equal chance in winning the event. They had to put their own weight, they had to have smokeless fuel and run underneath their own steam.
What sort of load did they have to carry?
Well, they had to carry 3 times their locomotive weight along the course, 10 times up and down for the competition.
10 times 1.5 miles.
Yes.
In both directions. That would kind of simulate Liverpool to Manchester in distance.
Give and take, yes.
Did many people attend?
Between 10,000 and 15,000, they think. And if you think what transportation was like then to get here, it's quite amazing.
And these people would be lining the track?
They were lining the track, yes, further down, just past the station.
Let's talk about the wonder of Rocket. How did Rocket perform?
Superb.
Well, superbly, yeah.
That's all I can say, superb.
Yeah, it ran at 29 miles an hour, didn't it?
29 miles an hour. Can you imagine the impact of 29 miles per hour on the crowd?
Yeah,
Yes.
they were hoping it would do 10 mile an hour, and it did 29 mile an hour.
Rocket's evident triumph settled that steam locomotion was the future of railways. This legendary engine has been preserved at the Locomotion Museum in Shildon, County Durham. Senior curator Anthony Cools knows why it left the other competitors in their tracks. Anthony, now I'm in the presence of greatness. Rocket.
Very much so. This is the original, accept no substitute, Stephenson's Rocket.
It's really compact. It's not a large machine at all.
No, you may call it the gentleman's light sporting locomotive in many ways. Everything it needs to do is encased in this very small frame. What you have here is the ingredients of every commercially successful steam locomotive in Britain until 1960 with the end of steam with Evening Star at Swindon.
How so?
So Stephenson didn't invent the various parts that made Rocket so good, but he put those elements together. So you have 3 basic innovations. The first is the multi-tubular boiler.
Oh yeah, so it's got lots of tubes.
The tubes through that boiler, which increase the heating surface. So it's a far more efficient steam generator. Innovation number 2 is actually missing from this engine, but this engine had a thing called a blast pipe. So the steam exhaust went directly from the cylinders through to the base of the chimney, and the exhaust steam went up the chimney, making that chuff, so beloved of a steam locomotive, that sound, and that chuff drew air through the fire and made the fire burn hotter. And the third innovation that Stephenson puts onto Rocket is the direct connection from the piston to the driving wheel. So there is a missing connecting rod here. But the fact that this was connected directly rather than through complex mechanisms makes an engine that is far more compact and able to perform efficiently and effectively using much less fuel.
There were several days of trial.
That's correct.
And over those days, Rocket proves its superiority.
It does, and initially it's not necessarily there as one of the front runners. There was an engine called the Novelty, which was made by Braithwaite and Ericsson in London, and it was light and it was fast. It was copper and it was blue. It looked so different. It looked nothing like this at all, and it went really fast. And of course that caught the public's imagination. They thought it was brilliant. But of course you put a load behind it, and as George Stephenson said quite cannily, it's got near guts. And of course Novelty couldn't pull the weight of train that they wanted it to. So that leaves one front runner, which is Rocket. It's fast, It's light, it's painted yellow, the colour of speed, very much as stagecoaches were, and it wipes the floor with the other contenders.
Given this locomotive's place in history, and that this is the genuine item, that so much of it is original, how do you feel in its presence?
We are in the presence of something like the railway Mona Lisa. This is an icon. That's an overused phrase so often in railway history, but this is the real thing. It's an absolute joy to have it in our collection and a real highlight to walk past it every day.
As railways snaked across the country, they steamed into our cultural life, inspiring the songs of the music halls, becoming symbols of modernity in art, and racing into the imagination and onto the pages of literature. One of the first writers to explore how railways had changed things was novelist Elizabeth Gaskell, whose works include North and South and Cranford. On board the train to Liverpool, I've arranged a rendezvous with Dr. Diane Duffy, chair of the Gaskell Society. Diane.
Hello.
Well met.
Hello, Michael.
Really good to see you.
Good to see you.
Come to talk to you about Elizabeth Gaskell.
Right.
19th century novelist. Now, she makes good use of trains, doesn't she?
She does indeed. In her first novel, Mary Barton, which was published in 1848 and set in the 1830s, there's a wonderful train journey from Manchester to Liverpool where Mary, who's travelling alone, which was very unusual, and I think Elizabeth is the first woman to write about a lone female traveller, is travelling to Liverpool to save her lover, and putting that in inverted commas, who is up for trial for murder, and Mary has evidence to prove that he's not guilty, and she's trying to get there in time to save him.
So the train plays a part in the drama. It emphasises the urgency of getting to Liverpool.
That's right. She loved dramatic incidents, and the whole tension of Mary being on this time frame, might not get there in time, single woman on her own, having to give evidence in court. You know, it's really heightened tension.
Let me hear, please, how Elizabeth Gaskell writes this piece.
The early trains for Liverpool on Monday mornings were crowded by attorneys, attorneys' clerks, plaintiffs, defendants and witnesses, all going to the assizes. Mary had never been on one before, and she felt bewildered by the hurry, the noise of the people, and bells and horns, the whiz and the scream of the arriving trains. The journey itself seemed to her a matter of wonder. She had a back seat and looked towards the factory chimneys and the cloud of smoke which hovers over Manchester.
Lovely. It's a beautiful piece of writing, beautiful piece of reading, if I may say so.
Thank you.
Diane and I are following in Mary Barton's fictional footsteps, arriving at Liverpool Lime Street. Elizabeth Gaskell showed Mary's courage and determination, and highlighted how the railways had made travel possible for all.
The next train to depart from platform 9 will be the 16:15 Avanti West Coast service to London Euston, calling at Runcorn, Crewe, Stafford, Wolverhampton.
Diane and I have made our way down to Liverpool's historic waterfront. Elizabeth Gaskell uses trains in her novels. Did she use them in her private life?
Yes, she did. She was a prodigious train traveller. She went across Britain on the train, never went to Wales, I don't think, not that we know, and she travelled on the continent on the train as well.
Do we know how she planned her journeys?
Yes, indeed. She used Bradshaw's timetables, but she never always had one that was in date. She writes in January 1860 that she's planning this train journey, but she's only got a November Bradshaw, which of course is couple of months out of date. So she asked the correspondent to please check carefully to make sure that the train times are still the same.
Apart from Elizabeth Gaskell, Were other Victorian novelists making good use of the railways?
Well, yes, Dickens used to use the train regularly, and of course there was a train accident at Staplehurst when he was on the train, and that appears in Edwin Drood. So Dickens also wrote about train journeys, but these tended to be a little bit later, I think, than some of Gaskell's journeys.
And talking of which, it's not just, of course, British novelists who are into trains. I think of Tolstoy, whose Anna Karenina begins with her witnessing a death on the railway and ends with her own death at a railway station.
Indeed, yes, suicide, yes. Very sad novel, I think. My opinion, yes, I love that book.
While the fictional Mary Barton was racing to Liverpool to save her lover, real-life tourists were arriving by train to explore Merseyside's bustling waterfront. In 1841, a Baptist missionary called Thomas Cook persuaded the Midland Counties Railway to run special trains between Leicester and Loughborough for a temperance meeting. He organised his first for-profit excursion, with trains leaving Leicester and Nottingham and Derby for Liverpool. In 1856, he offered his first grand European tour. He remarked that nothing marked our social progress more than the universal love of travel. They say that too many cooks can spoil the broth, but one cook alone invented mass tourism. Today, there's a campaign to improve rail travel in the Northwest to boost prosperity in the 21st century. There's a plan to build a new high-speed rail link between Liverpool and Manchester, part of the Northern Arc, an emerging economic corridor which would stretch to the Pennines and beyond. Mr. Mayor, quite a view. The Mayor of Liverpool, Steve Rotherham, is leading the charge on the new link. Well, what would that new railway have to achieve?
Well, it has to have the ability to put more freight onto rail, so capacity is the major thing that I'm arguing for. But of course, it needs to shrink the journey times between Liverpool and Manchester. And if we can get it down to sort of, half an hour, that would be a really good thing for economic growth. And what we've put forward are proposals that indicate that £90 billion worth of additional growth would be generated by the shrinkage to about half an hour of a journey between those two great northern cities.
The Northern Arc would need to be financed by central government. A far cry from the Wild West nature of railway mania in the 1840s, when the success of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway sparked wild speculation, a flood of private investment in new lines, and the inevitable crash. At the centre of it was a Yorkshireman, George Hudson, the so-called Railway King. I've crossed the Pennines and arrived in the village of Scrangham, northeast of York, to learn about the greatest railway entrepreneur of the 19th century and his fall from grace.
Hello, Michael. Welcome to Scrangham Church.
Thank you so much. Matthew Wells has written a biography of Hudson.
This is the last resting place of George Hudson, the Railway King.
Well, indeed, and this is the grave or the tomb, is it?
This is indeed.
This looks like farming country. How did a boy from farming country become king of the railways?
Well, he left home at age 15 to go to York to become a draper's assistant, and he became a partner in the firm himself in 1820. In 1827, he inherited quite a substantial fortune from a very distant uncle, and that allowed him then to enter the political elite of York.
Using his wealth and influence, Hudson bought up shares in new railway companies and developed his home city of York into a major railway hub. How would you describe the railway mania of the 1840s?
It was madness. People thought that railways were not just the future, but were a way of making easy money. Mm-hmm. A little like the dot-com bubble in the 1990s, when people were chasing money thinking this is the future, this is what we need to invest in, and not realising that, well, there's not so much value in the investment as you think there is.
Yeah.
Railways are very expensive, and they were very expensive then But Hudson, he started off by producing big dividends that encouraged shareholders to come forward and invest in his railways.
I fear it wasn't just wealthy people who put their money into railways. I mean, even middling people put their money in, didn't they?
Yes, if they had money to spare, then they could buy small shares. So, for example, you get people like the Bronte sisters. They had invested money in the railways. They only invested a small amount of money. It was people who invested large amounts of money who perhaps would have been more nervous about what was going to happen if the railway main bubble ever burst.
And it did?
And it did.
How predominant did Hudson become in the world of railways?
He's extremely predominant, and he epitomises the railway mania. And by the time of his fall, at the end of 1848, he was controlling around 1,300 miles in England. The total mileage was just under 5,000, which means he was controlling about 25% of railways.
That is extraordinary. Now, the fall from grace. Was Hudson guilty of improprieties or irregularities?
He was definitely guilty of irregularities, and his accounting procedures were questionable, to say the least. For example, he paid some of the dividends to shareholders from capital, and the money that was made by the railways he didn't sort of always see as being made by his individual companies, but being made by himself.
He didn't distinguish between what was his and what was his shareholders.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Although he always claimed, of course, he did everything in the interest of his shareholders and his directors.
Yeah.
But he was so powerful. His energy, his self-confidence and his authority persuaded the shareholders and even his fellow directors just to believe what he said.
In 1849, Hudson's empire began to unravel when shareholders in one of his railway companies grew suspicious and launched an investigation. The fall from grace was massive and catastrophic, was it not?
It was, yeah. He lost everything, and then he just became basically a pauper.
What's your summary of George Hudson?
There's no doubt that he did things that he shouldn't have done when it comes to accounting, but he should be recognised more for his achievements than for his misdemeanours and his misjudgments. He did an awful lot for York. He created it into the railway city that it became, and still is. He did an awful lot for Newcastle. The high-level bridge over Newcastle was designed by Robert Stephenson, but the person who drove the project forward, who found the money, promoted the railway, was George Hudson.
There's an old expression that you don't want to see how sausages are made. And the early development of the railways in Britain was messy, even dirty. It was early capitalism at its most raw and uncontrolled. This church window is dedicated to George Hudson. He may not have been without stain, but without him, the railways would not have moved forward at their extraordinary pace. Britain's love affair with trains steams ahead, back at the greatest gathering in Derby. Over 140 historic and modern locomotives have been brought together at the Litchurch Lane Works, one of the oldest and largest train factories in the world. The nation's favourites are here. The supremely elegant, streamlined design of the A4 class, and this one is named after its engineer, Sir Nigel Gresley. Flying Scotsman, 97 tons in weight, 70 foot in length. The first steam engine officially to achieve 100 miles an hour. Workhorses from more recent times. I suppose that diesels don't have the universal appeal of steam locomotives, but this Deltic, a Class 55, was an important piece of technology when it was introduced in 1961. Actually then, the world's most powerful single-unit diesel. Only 22 were ever made. The greatest gathering is also an opportunity to look to the future of rail. Once the crowds have departed, the Litchurch Lane factory will begin to assemble the fleet of new trains for HS2 between London and Birmingham. They're being built in a joint venture between Alstom and Hitachi. Good to see you.
And you.
James Grundy is the project director. James, we're in a mock-up of the sort of rolling stock that will run on High Speed 2. Tell us about the characteristics of those trains.
Well, essentially the most important one for us is the 360 kilometres per hour, very high-speed train, fastest in the UK network. In terms of characteristics, big focus on comfort and passengers, bringing more seat space.
And these trains will be how long, how many seats?
200 metres and around 500 seats per train.
Do we know yet what the journey time will be from Euston in London to Curzon Street in Birmingham?
Yeah, so the current estimate's 49 minutes.
Which is a very considerable improvement. What do you think about what is being achieved along that route?
I think it's momentous. Certainly Colne Valley Viaduct is a massively impressive structure and a super piece of architecture. And then the tunnelling is just magnificent.
Can you imagine how you'll feel the day that a real train like this runs on that railway line?
Very proud. Very, very proud. The railway is a family environment, and there'll be so many colleagues by that point that would have contributed to the service introduction. It'll just be a momentous occasion.
This celebration of 200 years is a chance to reflect on how far we've come. John Smith, the CEO of GB Rail Freight, has invited me to take part in the long-standing tradition of naming locomotives, this time honouring a pioneering trailblazer, Karen Harrison, Britain's first female train driver.
She joined the railways in 1977. She became fully qualified in 79, and it's fair to say that she suffered quite a lot of anti-feeling towards her in terms of driving trains. Now, sadly, Karen passed away in 2011, but we've been in touch with her family and we've explained that we would like to name this GB Rail Freight locomotive. And Michael was kind enough to say that he would unveil the name to commemorate this lady's life in changing train driving in the UK.
I'm absolutely delighted and honoured to unveil this plaque and to name this locomotive Karen Harrison. Hooray! But my work here is not yet done. A second loco will be named, I'm told, after another railway pioneer. Well, it has a very excellent name. Thank you very much. I must say, an enormous honour, John. May I say that I approve very much of its bright colours, and it's even more of a privilege to have a locomotive named in the 200th year. Thank you very much. You've done us proud today. Thank you. The railways were a transformative technology that changed everything about the way that people lived. They tied together cities and nations and continents and unleashed unprecedented economic growth. They are an enduring innovation. Even today, most countries depend on them, and they are investing heavily in extending and modernising their networks. And this wonderful story began in England 200 years ago, which is perhaps why we British suffer from incurable railway nostalgia. At least I do, and I do not appear to be alone.